What happens when two powerful forces collide in the heart of Las Vegas? A billionaire tech mogul and a woman who won't bow to anyone. Not even him. In today's video, we dive into the unforgettable moment that changed everything between Ronnie and Joyce, but trust me, this is just the beginning. Let's see how love and power can transform even the most stubborn hearts. The Mirage Grand Hotel glittered beneath the chandeliers like a palace of gold and secrets. The city's richest gathered in their finest. Men in sleek tuxedos, women in shimmering gowns, the air heavy with perfume and ambition. A string quartet played softly, their notes weaving through the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. And then, the atmosphere shifted. A quiet ripple of awareness swept through the crowd as Ronnie Cook entered. He didn't need to announce himself. The air simply changed when he walked in. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, he moved with the confidence of a man who owned not just the building, but the city it stood in. Conversations hushed, eyes followed, some out of admiration, most out of fear. Ronnie Cook was the kind of man people obeyed without question. His reputation was ironclad, ruthless in business, unshakable in demeanor, a storm in human form. And he knew it. He moved toward the front tables near the stage, scanning for a seat. But what he saw made him pause. A woman, elegant, calm, and completely unbothered, sat in his favorite seat position. She was radiant, her warm brown skin glowing against the deep midnight blue of her gown. Soft curls framed her face as she laughed with a friend, her voice melodic but grounded, utterly unaware or unconcerned by the sudden hush around her. Ronnie approached, each step measured. The crowd's eyes darted between them, sensing something about to ignite. "You're sitting in my seat," he said evenly, his tone sharp enough to cut through the music. Joyce Rojas looked up. Her eyes, deep and steady, met his without hesitation. "Then I guess you'll have to find another one," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "This one's taken." The nearby tables went silent. Someone actually gasped. Ronnie tilted his head, studying her. "Do you know who I am?" "No, I don't, and I don't care to," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Whoever you are doesn't give you the right to own every chair in the room." For a long second, neither moved. The space between them pulsed with tension, his pride against her calm defiance. He was used to being obeyed instantly, yet she didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't even look impressed. Something inside him shifted, a mix of irritation and intrigue he couldn't quite name. He stepped back finally, his expression unreadable. "Enjoy the seat," he said coldly, and walked away. But even as he disappeared into the glittering crowd, her voice lingered in his mind, that quiet confidence, that unshaken gaze. Ronnie Cook had met countless people who wanted his approval. Joyce Rojas was the first who didn't care to earn it. The following morning, sunlight streamed across Las Vegas, like a spotlight on reinvention. Joyce stood before her mirror, adjusting the collar of her ivory blouse. She had an interview at one of the city's top investment firms, a position she'd worked years to reach. Her stomach twisted with anticipation. She'd prepared for this moment endlessly, driven by ambition and faith in her ability. Still, last night's encounter replayed in her mind. The arrogant billionaire who thought he owned the world, and her seat. She shook her head with a soft laugh. "Let's just hope I never have to see him again," she muttered. Fate, as always, had other plans. When she stepped into the boardroom, the air froze. At the head of the long glass table sat Ronnie Cook. He looked up from a stack of papers, that same cool confidence on his face, but this time a faint smirk tugged at his lips. "Still refusing to give up seats, Miss Rojas?" For a split second, she was speechless. Then she drew a slow breath, squared her shoulders, and replied, "Still assuming they all belong to you, Mr. Cook?" The executives around the table exchanged wary glances. No one talked to Ronnie like that. But Ronnie leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "Please," he gestured, "continue." Joyce kept her poise, answering each question with precision and insight. Her voice was steady, her reasoning sharp, her vision for leadership bold yet grounded. Every time Ronnie tried to test her composure, she matched him with wit and grace. Halfway through, he found himself actually listening, not to judge, but to understand. When the final question ended, Joyce rose from her chair. "If this interview is a personal game, Mr. Cook, I'll take my leave." For the first time that morning, he laughed, a deep, genuine sound that startled even him. "You've got nerve," he said with a grin. "You're hired." Her eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "I need someone who doesn't flinch at power," he replied. "You'll fit perfectly here." The room erupted into whispers. Ronnie Cook hiring someone who challenged him. Unheard of. Joyce hesitated. She didn't trust his motives, but something in his tone, something unexpectedly sincere, made her nod. "Then I'll see you Monday." As she walked out, Ronnie watched her go, his smile fading into thought. He couldn't explain it, but he knew one thing. This woman wasn't just another employee. She was going to change everything. By the end of her first week, Joyce had already made an impression. She wasn't loud, but her presence commanded attention in its own quiet way. She led meetings with poise, listened more than she spoke, and when she did, her words carried weight. While others tried to please Ronnie, Joyce simply did her job, efficiently, intelligently, and without ego. From his glass-walled office, Ronnie found himself watching her more than he intended. Not because of attraction, at least that's what he told himself, but because she operated differently than anyone he'd met. Where he inspired fear, she inspired trust. Where he enforced obedience, she encouraged initiative. The atmosphere in the office shifted around her, lighter, warmer. One afternoon, as she presented a project proposal, a senior partner interrupted her mid-sentence. Joyce didn't shrink back. She calmly finished her thought, making her point so clearly the room fell silent. Even Ronnie couldn't hide his approval. After the meeting, he stopped her in the hallway. "You handled that well," he said. "Thank you," she replied, "though I'm sure you would have handled it differently." He smirked. "You mean aggressively?" "I was going to say dramatically," she said, eyes twinkling. He chuckled. "Touché." Their exchanges became like that. Light, sharp, charged. But beneath the banter, something deeper stirred. One late evening, most of the staff had gone home. The office glowed in quiet stillness, the city lights stretching across the horizon. Ronnie stood by the window, lost in thought, when Joyce appeared with 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like you could use this," she said softly. He accepted it, surprised. "Thanks." They sat at the conference table, silence settling comfortably between them before she spoke. "You ever think about what drives you?" He took a slow sip, eyes fixed on the skyline. "My father used to say compassion is weakness, that the world respects strength and nothing else." Joyce leaned back. "And do you believe that?" "I used to." He glanced at her. "Now I'm not so sure." Her voice was quiet but steady. "Maybe strength isn't about control, Ronnie. Maybe it's about knowing when to let go." The words hit deeper than he expected. He looked at her, not as an employee, not as a challenge, but as someone who saw straight through the armor he'd spent years building. "Maybe you're right," he murmured. She smiled faintly, rising from her seat. "Good night, Mr. Cook." "Good night, Miss Rojas." As the door closed behind her, Ronnie stayed still, his reflection caught against the window. For years he'd ruled through dominance, convinced that fear was respect. But one woman, calm, unshaken, and impossibly kind, had just dismantled that illusion with a single conversation. He exhaled slowly, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. Maybe strength could be gentle after all. And maybe, just maybe, Joyce Rojas was the one person who could teach him how. That night, as Las Vegas shimmered beneath the desert stars, Ronnie Cook realized that the world he controlled so easily was no longer enough. He'd met someone who didn't tremble in his presence, someone who saw him not as a man to fear, but as one capable of becoming more. He didn't know what to call the feeling she'd awakened in him. Admiration, curiosity, something dangerously close to hope. All he knew was that Joyce Rojas had walked into his life like a quiet storm, and nothing would ever be the same again. The rhythm of the office began to change in ways no one could have predicted. Weeks slipped into months, and with each passing day, Ronnie Cook felt the unfamiliar warmth of transformation creeping into his world. Joyce Rojas was at the center of it all. She led with a grace that disarmed people, balancing confidence with kindness. Her meetings were filled with laughter instead of tension, collaboration instead of competition. She didn't demand excellence, she inspired it. And the results were undeniable. The numbers rose, but so did morale. Employees began to smile again. They stopped whispering when Ronnie passed by. He noticed the shift before anyone else. At first, it unsettled him. Then it began to fascinate him. He found himself pausing to listen when she spoke, studying not just what she said, but how people responded. There was a quiet authority in her that needed no volume, no intimidation, and somehow, that strength was rubbing off on him. One morning, as he waited for the elevator, a young intern nearly tripped trying to rush past him. Ronnie instinctively reached out and steadied him. "You're fine," he said, pressing the elevator button again. The intern froze, shocked. "Thank you, Mr. Cook." Ronnie gave a small nod. The doors opened, and he stepped inside, only to find Joyce already there, holding a tablet. She raised an eyebrow. "Who are you, and what have you done with Ronnie Cook?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm learning from the best." Her laughter filled the elevator, soft and genuine. It wasn't flirtatious, it was friendly, easy. For the first time, it wasn't tension that charged the air between them, but lightness. As the doors slid open, he found himself wishing the ride had lasted longer. And as the days went by, that lightness stayed with him. He greeted people in the hallways. He thanked his team after meetings. The staff whispered about it in astonishment. Ronnie Cook, the man who'd once terrified them, now smiled when he passed. But only one person truly knew the reason why. Their professional partnership deepened naturally, their connection growing in the quiet moments between deadlines and decisions. Late nights in the office became a rhythm neither planned but both expected. One particular evening, the building was nearly empty. The hum of the city below echoed faintly through the windows as Joyce sat surrounded by papers and coffee cups, her focus unwavering. Ronnie leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Still here?" "Still working," she replied without looking up. "The proposal's due tomorrow." He walked in and set a second cup of coffee beside her. "Then you'll need this." She glanced at it, a smile tugging at her lips. "You're learning fast." He chuckled. "I had a good teacher." Hours slipped by as they worked side by side. The conversation drifted from business to childhood stories, from failures to dreams. Ronnie spoke about growing up in a house where emotions were a liability, where strength was measured in dominance. "My father used to say," he murmured, eyes distant, "a man who shows compassion invites weakness." Joyce looked at him quietly. "And what do you think now?" He hesitated. "I think he was wrong, but it's hard to unlearn what's built into you." "Then start with one thing," she said softly. "Start by forgiving yourself for believing it." He turned toward her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "You make me want to be someone better." She held his gaze. "Then be that man, not for me, but for yourself." At the next red light, he almost leaned in, but stopped, his restraint heavier than any touch could be. "Not yet," he whispered, voice low. "You deserve patience." The words hung between them, delicate and powerful. That night, as he drove her home, the silence wasn't awkward. It was intimate, thick with emotion neither dared name. By the time they reached her building, Joyce's heart beat unevenly and Ronnie's hands gripped the wheel a little too tight. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night," he replied, his tone full of something unspoken. From that moment, something shifted. The air between them was different now, charged not with tension, but with quiet understanding. They didn't cross lines. They didn't need to. Every glance in the office, every passing smile, every shared silence was a promise neither of them fully admitted, but both felt deeply. Ronnie was a man accustomed to clarity. He dealt in facts, figures, and certainty. But nothing about Joyce fit into neat categories. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met, strong yet gentle, fearless yet kind. She had a way of disarming him with just a few words. The same woman who had defied him at that gala now occupied his thoughts during every meeting, every quiet night. He told himself it was admiration, respect, maybe fascination. But when her laughter carried from across the office, he felt something stir inside him. Something far more personal. He'd built his empire on control. But around Joyce, control felt irrelevant. For Joyce, the struggle was just as real. She admired Ronnie's brilliance, his drive, the way he'd slowly begun to change, not because she demanded it, but because he wanted to. Yet she also knew the risks of caring for someone like him. Power and love rarely mixed well. One afternoon, in the middle of a tense board meeting, Ronnie overruled one of her strategic proposals. His decision was abrupt, his tone sharper than usual. Afterward, Joyce walked straight to his office. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet strength. "You hired me because I wasn't afraid of you," she said firmly. "Don't expect me to start now." Ronnie froze, caught off guard. No one had ever spoken to him that way, not even his board members. He looked at her for a long moment, the weight of her words settling in. Then, to her surprise, he nodded slowly. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Her anger softened into something gentler. "Apologies are a good start." He gave a faint smile. "You're the only person who's ever told me that." "That's because I'm the only one who expects better from you," she replied, and turned to leave. As she walked away, Ronnie leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. He wasn't sure what had changed more, his company or himself. The man who once demanded obedience had just learned humility, and somehow it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like freedom. The next few days passed with a strange tension neither could ignore. Their conversations were polite, professional, but every shared glance held the memory of something unspoken. Then came the night of the big presentation. The entire team had stayed late to prepare for the pitch that could define the firm's future. The conference room glowed under soft golden light, documents scattered across the table. Ronnie stood beside Joyce, both reviewing the final slides. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, sending subtle sparks through the air. "Everything looks perfect," Joyce said, scrolling through the deck. "Because you made it that way," Ronnie replied. She looked up at him, a little flustered. We both did. Silence settled between them, thick and intimate. He turned slightly, his voice lower now, almost unsure. "Joyce, I don't know what you've done to me." She blinked, caught off guard. "I used to walk into a room and own it without saying a word," he continued. "Now I walk into one and look for you." Her breath caught. She turned away, searching for composure. "Ronnie, I'm not asking for anything," he said softly. "I just need the truth." Joyce hesitated, her hands trembling slightly on the laptop. Then she turned to face him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then here's mine. You make me feel seen. And that scares me." For a moment, neither moved. The air seemed to still, every sound outside fading away. Then Ronnie took a slow step forward. His expression wasn't commanding or arrogant, it was vulnerable. "Joyce," he whispered, "I don't want to be the man people fear anymore." Her eyes softened, then stopped being him. He reached up, hesitating for just a heartbeat, then brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was barely there, but it carried years of unspoken emotion. When their lips met, it wasn't rushed or desperate, it was slow, trembling, and real. The kiss wasn't about dominance or conquest. It was surrender. For the first time in his life, Ronnie Cook, the man who'd controlled everything, let go. And as he did, he realized that love, the one thing he'd always considered weakness, was the only thing strong enough to change him completely. That night, as the neon glow of Las Vegas shimmered beyond the windows, two souls who had once stood on opposite ends of power found themselves in quiet balance. Joyce had never planned to fall for him. Ronnie had never believed he could change. But somewhere between their clashes and their confessions, pride gave way to understanding, and fear turned into something tender, something new. Neither of them spoke as they stood by the window after the kiss, the city alive beneath them. But they didn't need to, because in that silence they both knew. This was only the beginning. The weekend unfolded like a quiet dream. Ronnie and Joyce wandered through the winding streets of a charming town, hand in hand, the world fading around them. The scent of fresh pastries filled the air as they strolled past cozy cafes and boutique shops, laughing over small jokes and lingering over every moment. As the sun dipped low, they found themselves by the water, the sky painting shades of pink and orange. Ronnie pulled Joyce close, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw, as she gazed at him with a softness that made his heart ache. "I never thought I'd find peace in something like this," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. Joyce smiled, her eyes shimmering with warmth. "It's not about the place, Ronnie. It's about being here, together." Time, in the world of business, was usually measured in profits and losses, but for Ronnie Cook and Joyce Rojas, it began to move differently, slower, richer, filled with purpose. Months passed, and the empire that had once thrived on fear now flourished under something far rarer: respect. Joyce's influence could be felt in every corner of the company. Meetings once filled with tension now buzzed with ideas. Employees no longer flinched at mistakes. They collaborated to fix them. She had replaced control with connection, and Ronnie, to his own surprise, followed her lead. He still had that commanding presence, but it was tempered now by sincerity. He greeted people by name. He listened instead of dictating. When his staff thanked him, it wasn't out of obligation. It was genuine gratitude. Joyce often caught him standing quietly in the hallway, watching his team with a faint, reflective smile. The transformation was undeniable, but he never boasted about it. He just changed. And in that change, their relationship deepened. They didn't need grand declarations. Their affection lived in small gestures: shared coffee in the mornings, unspoken glances across the boardroom, the quiet comfort of working side by side. It was love built on trust, forged through growth and humility. One morning as Joyce entered her office, she found a folded note resting neatly on her desk. The handwriting was strong, confident, unmistakable. "Thank you for teaching me that strength can be gentle." Joyce smiled, her heart softening. The man who had once used power as a weapon now wielded it with grace. When she looked up, she saw him standing across the hallway behind his glass wall. Their eyes met briefly, and for a fleeting second, everything in the world seemed perfectly aligned. Ronnie Cook, the billionaire who once made people tremble, now found his peace in a woman who never bowed to him. The Mirage Grand shimmered again, alive with laughter, music, and champagne. It had been nearly a year since the night that started it all, the night Joyce Rojas refused to give up her seat. But tonight, things were different. Joyce was the guest of honor, the keynote speaker for a leadership and innovation award that recognized not just her achievements, but her impact on workplace culture. Her name had become synonymous with integrity and empowerment. She was admired, not just for her brilliance, but for her humanity. Ronnie stood at the edge of the ballroom watching her. Pride swelled quietly in his chest as she took the stage. The spotlight reflected off her gown, a soft gold that shimmered against her warm skin. She spoke with conviction, her voice carrying both power and tenderness. "I used to believe leadership was about being heard," she said. But real leadership, the kind that lasts, is about listening, about creating space for others to be their best. Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Ronnie couldn't take his eyes off her. When she finished, she smiled gracefully and began to step down from the stage. That's when he moved. The crowd parted instinctively as Ronnie walked forward. His tuxedo was sharp, but his demeanor was softer than anyone had ever seen. He carried no arrogance, no commanding air, only purpose. He climbed the steps to the stage and turned to face the audience. The music faded. The chatter silenced. Taking the microphone, he spoke clearly, his tone steady but emotional. Last year, I came to a gala believing power meant control. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before returning to Joyce. Tonight, I know power is grace, and no one embodies it better than Joyce Rojas. The audience murmured in surprise. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Ronnie turned toward her, lowered himself to one knee, and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Joyce's hand flew to her mouth. He looked up at her, his blue eyes filled with something that no longer resembled pride, only love. "You once refused to give me a seat," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But you gave me a reason to change. Joyce, will you marry me?" The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Cameras clicked wildly. Joyce's eyes glistened with tears. She took a shaky breath, then smiled. That same calm, steady smile that had once silenced a billionaire. "And I'm never giving either back," she said softly. The crowd rose to their feet, applause thundering through the ballroom. It wasn't just for the proposal, it was for what it represented. For the man who had learned humility, and the woman who had inspired it. As Ronnie slipped the ring onto her finger, the chandeliers above seemed to sparkle brighter, reflecting the promise of something new. Love built not on power, but on partnership. The evening after the proposal began with a candlelit dinner at a rooftop restaurant, the city lights sprawling below them like a sea of stars. Ronnie's hand brushed against Joyce's as they reached for their wine glasses, the quiet hum of conversation around them fading into the background. She wore a sleek black dress, the fabric hugging her figure perfectly, and her eyes sparkled with warmth as she smiled at him. "So," Ronnie said, his voice low and playful, "I have to ask, what's the most memorable date you've ever been on?" Joyce chuckled softly, swirling her glass. "You're looking at it," she teased, glancing up at the twinkling lights. "Nothing beats a dinner with good company and even better conversation." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Good company, huh?" She leaned in slightly, her gaze steady and confident. "You're more than that, Ronnie. You've taught me that sometimes the best moments aren't about grand gestures, but the quiet ones that make you feel truly seen." The words lingered between them like a soft promise, the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air. As they shared the next course, the connection deepened, each look and laugh a reminder of how far they'd come, and how much further they wanted to go. The desert sun set slow and golden over the Las Vegas skyline, casting a soft glow over the rooftop garden where white roses and string lights framed the aisle. The air was warm, the scent of jasmine drifting lazily through the evening breeze. Joyce walked forward, her gown flowing like light itself. Ivory silk caressed her skin, the fabric moving with the grace of her every step. She held a bouquet of lilies and blush roses, simple, elegant, timeless. At the end of the aisle stood Ronnie. His usual calm composure faltered the moment he saw her. His heart thudded hard in his chest, his throat tightening with emotion. The man who had faced boardrooms and billion-dollar deals without flinching now found himself trembling for the first time in his life. When she reached him, their hands met, steady, certain. The officiant began, but neither truly heard the words. Their eyes locked, the world fading into background noise. During his vows, Ronnie's voice broke softly. "You were the first person who told me no," he said, "and the first who truly saw me. I used to think power made me strong, but it was your compassion that taught me what strength really is." Joyce blinked back tears. When it was her turn, her voice carried warmth that filled the air like music. You taught me that strength doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it's found in the heart that dares to change. As the vows ended, the sky deepened into twilight, streaked with gold and lavender. The city lights below began to shimmer, reflecting their glow like a sea of stars. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Ronnie cupped her face gently, his touch reverent. The kiss was slow and deep, not dramatic, but profound. The guests erupted in applause. Some wiped tears, others smiled knowingly. The man who once ruled with an iron will now stood humbled by love. Soft music played as they walked hand in hand down the aisle, petals falling at their feet. As they reached the edge of the rooftop, Ronnie paused, turning to look out over the city that had witnessed their story. Las Vegas, once a symbol of his pride, now shimmered like a mirror of his redemption. Joyce leaned against him, her voice quiet but full of meaning. "You did it, Ronnie. You became the man you wanted to be." He smiled, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "Because you believed I could." The reception glowed beneath the stars. Laughter, soft jazz, and the golden shimmer of fairy lights draped over the rooftop terrace. The tables overflowed with flowers, the dance floor alive with warmth and celebration. Ronnie and Joyce sat side by side, finally still after hours of speeches and dancing. He leaned toward her, his smile playful now, his voice low. "Do you remember the seat that started all this?" Joyce laughed, her eyes lighting with memory. "How could I forget? You were so sure it was yours." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "It's yours forever now." Her smile softened. "You sure you're okay with that?" He chuckled, leaning closer. "I've never been more certain of anything." They looked out together at the glittering skyline, the same city that had once mirrored his arrogance, now reflecting their joy. The lights shimmered like tiny promises, the hum of the strip fading beneath the music of their laughter. In that moment, everything came full circle. The man who once made everyone tremble now trembled only for love. Joyce rested her head on his shoulder, her voice a whisper. "You know, it's funny. You spent years chasing power, but the real power was always here." He turned to her, curious. "Where?" She smiled, touching his chest lightly. "Right there." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Then I promise to never misuse it again." They sat quietly for a while, soaking in the glow of the city, the sound of laughter, the rhythm of forever beginning. When the photographer passed by, Ronnie looked directly into the camera, his arm around Joyce, their faces serene. It wasn't the face of a man who conquered the world. It was the face of a man who finally found peace in it. As the final song played and the crowd danced below, the camera slowly pulled back, the couple a soft silhouette against the vast, glittering expanse of Las Vegas. The city that once celebrated pride now bore witness to redemption. And somewhere between the pulse of lights and the rhythm of love, Ronnie Cook realized that the seat he once demanded had never really mattered, because the woman who refused to give it up had given him something infinitely greater, a place in her heart. Forever. Thank you for being part of Whispers of Hope. Your love and support mean more than words. Together we're spreading light, one whisper at a time.